The stretcher came out first. Then the being on it, 8 feet of solid Gorthian warrior, grey-skinned and thick-boned, a creature that had walked through a burning ship hull without flinching. 3 wars, 1 supernova evacuation. A creature whose species did not have a word for retreat because they had never needed one. He was staring at the ceiling with the eyes of a man who had seen something that rearranged the furniture inside his brain. Brax, chief imperial steward of the Drakval Empire, watched the stretcher roll past and made a small mark on his list. A long list, 17 names long. Every single name had a line through it now. He closed the list, tucked it under his arm, and went to report to the Empress. The hatchling wings smelled like warm stone and burnt metal. 3 sets of claw marks ran along the left wall, fresh and deep, the kind of marks made by small claws moving fast and having enormous fun. A section of ceiling near the door had been melted smooth. The temperature inside was, as always, 12 degrees higher than the rest of the station. Brax stepped over a chewed piece of what used to be an observation chair and kept walking. Empress Sova was standing at the far window. She was tall, dark-scaled, and very still in the way that only ancient things can be still, the kind of stillness that has weight to it. She was watching her 3 hatchlings sleep in a pile in the corner. Raka, the bold one, had his chin resting on Sorin's back. Sorin, the sneaky one, had somehow managed to sleep partially inside the wall cavity. Tuli, the loud one, was spread flat on her back with all 4 legs in the air, producing a faint sound like a kettle that had not quite decided whether to boil. They looked peaceful. They were, Brax knew, never peaceful when awake. The Gorthian, Sova asked without turning. Catatonic, Brax said. The healers say he will recover. Physically, he is completely unharmed. What happened? Brax checked his notes. Tuli sat on his chest for 4 hours, just sat and looked at him. He turned a page. Raka disassembled his ceremonial armor while he was wearing it, piece by piece, apparently just to see how it worked. He turned another page. Sorin disappeared for 2 hours and was eventually located inside the warrior's helmet. He had been there the entire time, watching. Sova was quiet for a moment. They were not being cruel. No, Brax agreed. They were curious and bored. That was the real problem, and they both knew it. The hatchlings were not malicious. They were young, they were sharp, and they could feel fear the way other creatures feel heat, an instinct as old as their species. When something was afraid of them, they leaned into it, not out of cruelty, out of interest, out of the pure animal delight of something responding to them. Every caretaker so far had been afraid from the first moment, and the hatchlings had responded accordingly. We have now, Brax said carefully, exhausted every willing candidate in the conclave who meets the basic physical requirements for the role. Every candidate. Every willing one, yes. Sova turned from the window. Her eyes, amber and calm, settled on him. You have a suggestion. It was not a question. Brax had been her steward for 30 years. She always knew when he had a suggestion. He reached into his case and produced a file. It was thinner than the others. Humanity had not been in the conclave long enough to generate much paperwork. He set it on the table between them. I reviewed every species in our registry, he said, looking for one common quality, something we have not tried. He folded his hands. Every species we have used experienced fear responses upon meeting the hatchlings. The fear is what the hatchlings respond to. The fear is what makes things worse. He tapped the file. There is one species in the conclave with documented, repeated, verified behavioral anomalies around dangerous creatures. They keep venomous animals as companions. They find large predators, quote, cute. There are records of individual members running toward dangerous situations out of what their own scientists describe as uncontrollable curiosity. He paused. There are also records of them laughing during events that should, by any biological standard, produce panic. Sova looked at the file. She did not open it. You are suggesting we try a human. I am suggesting, Brax said, that we try a human. She picked up the file. She opened it. She read for 3 minutes in complete silence while the hatchlings snored behind her. When she closed it, her expression was difficult to read. Not disbelief, not certainty, something in between, the look of someone who has run out of logical options and found an illogical one waiting at the end of the list. The human diplomatic mission, she said, Ambassador Dale. He has a daughter, Brack said, 7 years old. Another silence. Set up the meeting, Sova said. She turned back to the window. Tully had rolled over in her sleep and was now making a noise that was either a growl or a snore. Raka had stolen Sorin's corner. Sorin had not noticed. Brax gathered his papers and walked out, stepping over the chewed chair again. Behind him, the Empress watched her sleeping dragons and allowed herself, very quietly, to hope. The official request arrived at 600 station time, formatted in Imperial Drakval script with 3 gold seals at the bottom, more seals than most governments got in a year. Dale read it twice, set it down, and sat very still for about 10 seconds. Then he called his assistant. Wren appeared in the doorway still holding a cup of something hot. She was young, efficient, and had the particular talent of looking completely unsurprised at things that were, in fact, extremely surprising. The Empress wants us to babysit her dragons, Dale said. Wren looked at the document. She looked at him. Her baby dragons. Her 3 baby dragons, yes, the ones that put a Gorthian warrior on a stretcher yesterday. I heard about that. Everyone heard about that. Wren sipped her drink. Are we going to do it? Dale looked at the 3 gold seals. He thought about what a yes meant for the human diplomatic mission, the trade agreements, the conclave standing, the dozen doors that were still closed to humanity because they were too new, too small, too unknown. He thought about what the Empress asking them specifically meant. Not another warrior species. Not a diplomat with a security detail. Them, humans, because they were the only ones left. Yes, he said, but I need to talk to Norah first. He found his daughter in her room, cross-legged on her bed, drawing something elaborate in a sketchbook. The drawing appeared to involve a large creature and a very small person, and the person seemed to be winning whatever was happening. Dale sat on the edge of the bed. I need to ask you something important, he said. Norah looked up. She had her mother's eyes, dark, focused, the kind that paid real attention when something was actually interesting. He explained it slowly. He told her about the Empress, about the hatchlings. He used calm words. He mentioned that the hatchlings were young and sometimes difficult. He listed carefully a few things they had done to previous caretakers, the catatonic Gorthian, the Velhari aide who fled after 6 minutes, the team of 3 Mekari observers who submitted a joint resignation letter after 1 afternoon. Norah listened to all of it without interrupting, which was unusual. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she clasped both hands together and said, with complete and total sincerity, "They sound amazing." Dale looked at his daughter. He thought, not for the first time, that she had gotten something from her mother's side of the family that he could not quite name, something that looked at a locked door and saw a room worth entering. They can breathe fire, he said. How much fire? Enough. She nodded, taking this in as useful information rather than a warning. Are they mean, or are they just bored? Dale paused. That was, he realized, a very precise question. Bored mostly, I think. Okay, Norah said, and went back to her drawing as if the matter was settled. Dale signed the agreement before noon. Across the station, in the offices of the Galactic Conclave, Brax was having a significantly worse morning. Councillor Maz had called an emergency session the moment he heard the plan, and Maz was the kind of politician who treated every emergency session like a personal audition. A child, Maz said. He said it the way someone might say the words, a single cracker, when told it was all that stood between them and starvation. You are proposing to place a human child in the hatchling wing. The Empress has made her decision, Brack said. The Empress, Maz said tightly, has clearly been under great strain. The Empress has exhausted every other option available to the conclave. 17 candidates. 17. Brax set his list on the table. If Counselor Maz has a name he would like to add to the list, I am happy to make it 18. Maz did not add a name. Back in the human quarters, Wren sat on the floor of Norah's room and helped her pack a bag for the next morning. It was a practical exercise that became, fairly quickly, a window into how Norah's mind worked. Into the bag went one stuffed animal, a small synthetic bear worn at the ears. 3 picture books chosen because Norah explained the pictures were good and you did not need to understand the words to follow what was happening. A ball of string, a bag of crackers because Norah said you should always bring a snack when you met someone new, and a hand puppet, a floppy, loose-stitched thing in the shape of something that was maybe a bird, maybe a fish, possibly neither. Wren held up the puppet. This. It's funny, Norah said simply, and took it back and put it in the bag. Wren zipped the bag closed. She looked at this small human child with her sensible bag and her complete absence of nerves, and felt something settle in her chest, not worry exactly, but the awareness of witnessing something she did not have a category for yet. Are you nervous? She asked. Norah thought about it genuinely, the way she thought about most things. No, she said, I just want to know what they're like. Wren nodded slowly. She went back to her desk and sent a message to the station medical team, not because she expected anything to go wrong, but because she was a good assistant and good assistants prepared for everything. Then she sat back and quietly thought that whatever happened tomorrow, it was going to be something none of them had a report template for. 3 things happened when the doors to the hatchling wing opened. The first was that warm air rolled out like a wave, not hot enough to be dangerous, but hot enough to feel intentional, like the room itself was breathing. The second was that 3 sets of eyes appeared in the dark at the far end of the room. Amber, unblinking, perfectly spaced, low to the ground and very, very still. The third was that Norah walked in. Brax followed at a distance of about 4 steps, which was as close as he intended to stay. He was holding a medical kit because that was protocol. He had also, quietly, left the door propped open because that was instinct. The hatchlings had arranged themselves. There was no other word for it. They had spread apart, Raka on the left, Sorin directly ahead, Tully elevated on a melted ridge of flooring to the right, so that anyone entering the room would be surrounded on 3 sides within 2 steps. It was not something anyone had taught them. It was something they knew. Every previous caretaker had stopped walking at this point. Norah kept walking. She got to the center of the room, stopped, set down her bag, and looked at all 3 of them in turn. She took her time. She was the kind of person who actually looked at things. Then she said, "Oh, you're so little." The silence that followed had texture to it. Raka's head came up. His nostrils flared. He had never in his short life been called little. He was larger than most of the furniture in the room. He was, by the standards of the Drakval at his age, impressively large. He puffed up his chest and let out a burst of flame, short, sharp, a crack of orange heat aimed at the floor just in front of Norah's feet. Norah held out her hand toward the fadding warmth and tilted her head. "That feels like a campfire," she said. She sounded interested. Raka stared at her. He breathed fire again, harder. "Still a campfire," Norah said, "just a bigger one." Behind his blast shield, Brax made a sound that did not belong to any known language. Sorin moved. He was the sneaky one, and sneaking was his favorite thing, and he did it beautifully, a shimmer, a shift, and then nothing. The visual field where he had been standing simply stopped containing a dragon. It was a neat trick. It had caused 2 of the previous caretakers to scream on the spot. Norah's eyes tracked slightly to the right. She was quiet. She was listening, her head tilted again. Sorin took one careful step. His claw made the softest possible sound on the stone floor. Norah pointed directly at him without looking. "You're right there," she said. A long pause. Then the shimmer reversed, and Sorin was visible again, sitting on his haunches with an expression that could only be described as offended interest. He looked at his own feet. He looked at her. He looked at his feet again, as if they had betrayed him. Then Tully screamed. It was the full one, the wide-open, full-lung scream that she deployed when she wanted a reaction, which was always. It had shattered the concentration of the Mekari observation team. It had sent the Velhari aide running into the wall. At close range it was, by any biological measure, alarming. Norah winced. She stuck a finger in one ear for a moment, then took it out. "Wow," she said, "you're really loud." Tully screamed again. Norah looked at her with something approaching respect. Then she took a breath, opened her mouth, and produced the most piercing, ear-splitting human child scream she could manage. It bounced off the stone walls. It rang. It was, in its own way, impressive. The room went absolutely silent. Tully had her mouth open. She closed it. She opened it again. She looked at Norah with the expression of someone who has just met a peer. Then Tully screamed again, but shorter. Norah screamed back, shorter. Tully screamed, shorter. Norah screamed, shorter. They went back and forth, each sound smaller than the last, until both of them were making tiny, nearly identical high-pitched squeaks, and then Norah laughed, a real laugh, bright and sudden, and Tully startled so hard she fell off her melted ridge. She scrambled back up immediately and stared. Brax had stopped breathing somewhere around the third exchange. He now remembered to start again. He stood behind his blast shield with his medical kit in both hands and his notes completely forgotten, watching a human child have a squeaking competition with an imperial dragon hatchling who had just fallen off her own perch. He opened his comm, he typed a message to the Empress, he read it back, he sent it anyway. It said, "It is going, unexpectedly." Raka had come forward during the screaming game. He was very close now, neck stretched, sniffing the top of Norah's head. She reached up, without asking, and scratched the ridge behind his ear. He froze. He had never been scratched before. His scales were theoretically impenetrable. Nobody had ever tried. He stood completely still for 4 full seconds, and then his back leg started thumping the ground like a heartbeat. Soren watched all of this from 3 feet away, visible, unblinking, and deeply thoughtful. Brax sent a second message to the Empress. It said, "Please stand by." In the corner, Tully had gotten to her feet. She was watching Norah with the particular attention of a creature that has, for the first time, encountered something it wants to understand instead of something it wants to frighten. She walked forward. She sat down next to Norah. She was not quite touching her, but she was close. The room was warm and quiet and smelled like burnt stone. Outside the blast shield, Brax slowly lowered the medical kit. He did not put it away, but he lowered it. By the second day, Brax had stopped bringing the medical kit to the door. He still brought it to the station. He left it in the corridor. He told himself this was standard procedure and not an admission that something had fundamentally changed, and he mostly believed himself. He watched through the observation screen as Norah pulled a long piece of string from her bag and dragged it slowly across the floor. Soren stared. He had been practicing his invisibility all morning. He was very good at it. He could hold a full shimmer for 20 minutes now, and he had been using those 20 minutes to circle Norah and breathe on the back of her neck, which had sent every previous visitor into a panic spiral. Norah had simply said, "I can hear you," and offered him a cracker. He had not gone invisible since. Now he stared at the string. It moved along the floor in a slow, irregular path. It paused. It moved again. Something in Soren's brain, something old and fast and not connected to his higher thinking at all, simply overrode everything else. He pounced. He missed. Norah pulled the string at the last second. He pounced again and got a claw on it, but the string pulled free. He pounced a third time with his whole body and landed with a floor-shaking thud, completely tangled. The string looped around 3 of his legs and his own tail. He lay there. He looked at himself. He looked at Norah. She was trying very hard not to laugh, which meant she was laughing. Soren, for reasons he could not have explained, did not mind. He stayed tangled for 40 minutes, because untangling himself would have ended the game, and he had decided the game was the best thing that had happened since hatching. Brax noted in his report that this was the longest Sorin had remained visible and engaged in recorded history. He then crossed out recorded history and wrote since hatching because the first version sounded too dramatic. It was still dramatic. He left both versions. On the afternoon of day 2, Norah sat down against the warm wall and opened one of her picture books. The hatchlings gathered around her the way water gathers in low places, slowly, then all at once, until all 3 of them were pressed in close, their heads at various heights above and around her, breath warm on the pages. She read out loud, she made voices. The scary character got a low, grinding voice that rumbled in her chest. The small lost one got a high, wobbling voice that cracked on the sad parts. When the scary character chased the small lost one, she stood up and acted it out, walking in exaggerated strides, and Raka stood up too, mirroring her walk with enormous, earnest inaccuracy, and then Tully stood up and mimicked Raka, and Sorin watched all 3 of them with his head tilted so far to the side it was nearly upside down. By the 3rd reading, Raka had learned which part was the scary character's entrance. He roared on cue every single time, and Norah roared back, and this was, both of them seemed to agree, the correct way the story worked. Brax's report entry for day 2 ended with the sentence, "I believe the eldest hatchling may have learned the concept of theater." He read it back 3 times. He sent it anyway. Day 3 brought the puppet. Norah pulled it from her bag, the floppy, loose-stitched thing that was maybe a bird, maybe a fish, possibly neither. She put it on her hand. She made it turn toward Tully. Tully went very still. The puppet tilted its head. Tully tilted hers. The puppet tilted the other way. Tully tilted the other way. The puppet opened its mouth and Norah made a sound, a small, ridiculous sound, not a word, not quite music, something in between. Tully sniffed the puppet. She backed up 1 step. She sniffed it again. She looked at Norah's face. She looked at the puppet's face. She looked at the place where Norah's hand disappeared into the puppet and reappeared as the puppet, and this seemed to be the part that did not make sense to her, the part she kept returning to. The puppet said something again. Tully answered, a short, low sound, nothing like her usual scream, a talking sound. The puppet replied. Tully replied. They went back and forth for 11 minutes. Brax stood at the observation screen and wrote in his report, "Tully has had a conversation with a piece of fabric." He stared at the sentence. He added, "It appeared to go well." He closed the report and did not open it again that evening. Day 4 was the crackers. Norah shared them the same way she shared everything, without announcement, without strategy, just as a simple fact. She had them, the hatchlings might want them, she offered. The hatchlings did not need crackers. Their diet was heat and raw protein, and occasionally the soft metals from the station walls, which Brax had stopped trying to prevent. But they took the crackers. Raka first, sniffing it carefully before taking it from her open palm with the very tip of his teeth, delicate as a surgeon. Then Tully, who took hers and crunched it with enormous satisfaction, as if she had waited her whole short life for the experience of eating something that made that specific sound. Then Sorin, who took his cracker, held it in his claws, and did not eat it, just kept it. He was still holding it when Norah left that evening. That evening, Empress Sova sat in front of her monitor and watched the recording of the afternoon. She watched Raka take a cracker from an open hand. She watched Sorin keep his. She watched Tully answer a puppet. She watched the 3 of them follow Norah to the door when it was time to go, walking close behind her like large, armored, fire-breathing ducklings. Raka bumped his head gently against her back. She reached up and patted his nose without slowing down. Sova sat in the quiet dark of her study for a long time after the recording ended. There was something tight in her chest that had been there for months, since before the first babysitter, since before Brax's list had started growing. Watching the screen, she felt it loosen. Just a little, just enough to notice it was there. She made a note to have Brax arrange the same time slot for tomorrow. The conclave chamber was designed to hold 12 species comfortably. Today it held 9 representatives, 2 assistants, one Empress, one steward, and Counselor Maz, who had been demanding this briefing for 4 days with the energy of someone who had a very specific speech prepared and was not going to let the facts interfere with it. Brax stood at the front of the room with a data pad and the particular expression of a man who has stopped being embarrassed about the contents of his own reports. "I will begin," he said, "with the summary, and then I am happy to take questions." He pulled up the first page. Over 4 consecutive days, the human child designated as temporary cultural liaison to the hatchling wing produced the following outcomes. All 3 hatchlings ceased aggressive and territorial behavior within the first hour of day 1. All 3 hatchlings initiated voluntary play behavior within 2 hours of that same day. By the end of day 2, the eldest hatchling, Raka, had begun performing on request, specifically vocalizing on cue during a story reading exercise. The middle hatchling, Sorin, has not destabilized a single internal system, wall panel, or monitoring node since day 1. The youngest hatchling, Tuli, initiated and sustained an unprompted communicative exchange with a hand puppet on day 3. He paused. That exchange lasted 11 minutes. Maz opened his mouth. "I will get to that," Brack said. He turned to the next page. In the same period, no caretaker has been injured, traumatized, or rendered non-functional. No new structural damage has been recorded in the hatchling wing. No formal complaints have been filed. All hatchlings ate on schedule and slept through the night on days 3 and 4, which has not occurred in the previous 6 weeks. The room was quiet. Maz, who had come in with a prepared speech about recklessness and diplomatic liability, now had the look of a person whose speech no longer fit the situation and who was trying to quickly rewrite it while also paying attention to what Brax was saying. He was not succeeding at either. "The mechanism," Brax continued, "appears to be as follows." He set down the pad. He spoke from memory because he had thought about this enough that the words were simply there. The Drakval hatchlings at this developmental stage are highly attuned to the fear responses of other beings. When a caretaker is afraid, the hatchlings sense it. They respond to it, not with cruelty, I want to be precise about this, but with curiosity, with engagement. For a hatchling, fear is information. It means the other creature has recognized them. It means they are real and present and significant. He looked around the room. Every caretaker we placed in that wing was afraid, understandably so, and the hatchlings responded to that fear in the only way they knew how, by leaning into it, by exploring it, by making it bigger, because bigger meant more information. He picked up the pad again. The human child was not afraid, not on day 1, not on day 4, not at any point in between. He said it plainly, without drama. The hatchlings have no behavioral template for a being that is present, engaged, paying full attention to them, and producing no fear signal whatsoever. The template does not exist because, in their experience, it has never happened before, so they did the only thing available to them. They improvised. They followed the signal they were given instead of the one they expected, and the signal they were given was curiosity, play, what the translators can only render as, and I am quoting the official xenopsych notation here, delight. Another silence. One of the representatives from the outer systems leaned forward. How is this possible, biologically? Brax nodded. He had expected this question. I reviewed the human xenopsych and evolutionary profiles. The short answer is this: humans developed in an environment full of things that could kill them. They could not outrun most of those things. They could not outfight them. What they did instead, and what their entire social and emotional architecture is built around, was approach, form bonds, treat the dangerous thing as worth knowing. He set the pad down again. They did not become safer by becoming tougher. They became safer by becoming warmer, by walking toward the thing that scared everyone else and deciding it was interesting. Maz said very quietly, "That is insane." "It worked," Brack said. Empress Sova spoke for the first time. Her voice carried without effort the way large things move, not loudly, but completely. "I have been told for some time," she said, "that my hatchlings are unmanageable, dangerous, beyond the capacity of any available caretaker." She let that sit for a moment. "What I have learned this week is that my hatchlings were not the problem. The fear was the problem. The fear made them worse. The fear gave them nothing to do except be frightening, because that was the only response available. She looked at the room. A human child walked into their wing without fear. Not because she was ignorant of the risk. She was told. She simply decided that knowing them was more interesting than being afraid of them. She paused. That is not insanity, counselor. That is a different kind of intelligence. Maz said nothing. He looked at his prepared speech and then slowly set it face down on the table. Sova continued. I am requesting that the human diplomatic mission be offered a permanent cultural liaison arrangement with the imperial household, effective immediately. She looked at Brax. And I would like it formally noted that the arrangement was the idea of a 7-year-old who packed a bag of crackers and a hand puppet and walked through my doors like she owned the place. Brax noted it. He noted it with what might, if one was being generous, have been called a smile. Maz, for the record, had no procedural objection available. He noted this too. He did not look happy about it, but he noted it. Norah came home with stone dust on her shoes and a small burn mark on the left cuff of her sleeve that was, Dale decided, not worth asking about right now. She dropped her bag by the door and climbed onto the kitchen counter to reach the cabinet where the good crackers were, because she had given all of hers away and she was hungry. Dale sat across from her and waited. How'd it go? He said. Good, she found the crackers. She came back to the table. Soren kept the one from yesterday. He still had it. The cracker. Yeah, he was holding it when I came in. He put it down to play, but he picked it back up when I left. She thought about this. I think he just likes having it. Dale nodded slowly. He had spent the afternoon in the conclave session listening to Brax describe his daughter's week in formal diplomatic language, and it had been one of the stranger experiences of his career, which was saying something. The Empress offered us a permanent arrangement, he said. Norah looked up. What does that mean? It means you can keep going back. For a long time, probably. She considered this. The same focused look she had given everything this week, not excited exactly, but engaged. Present, like she was building a complete picture before she responded to it. Are they going to be okay, she said, when I'm not there? Dale paused. It was not the question he expected. I think so. The Empress loves them. I think she's been very worried about them. Norah nodded. That seemed to matter to her. She ate a cracker. Raka does this thing, she said after a moment, where he walks heavier on purpose when he thinks you're not watching, like he's practicing being big. Is he not big? He's plenty big, but he practices anyway. She dusted cracker crumbs off her hands. I think it's because the others are watching him. He wants to look like he's not worried. Dale looked at his daughter. You got all that from 4 days. Norah shrugged. He's not that hard to read. She slid off the chair, picked up her bag, and headed for her room. At the door she stopped. Can I bring a friend tomorrow? A human friend. Yeah, Lyra from the research wing. She's 8. She's really good at games. Dale thought about Brax's report, about Maz's face, about 18 species in a row failing at something his daughter treated as an afternoon activity. I'll ask. Norah nodded and went to pack her bag. He could hear her moving around in her room, sorting things. He heard the zipper of the bag open and close, then open again. He did not check what she added. He trusted the process now. That night, Empress Sova made her rounds of the hatchling wing alone, which was how she preferred it. No guards at the inner door, no attendants, just her and the warm stone and the smell of her own children. Raka was asleep with a coil of string still twisted around one claw, the end trailing across the floor like a tail. He had refused to let Brax take it when the evening staff came through. Brax had written this in the report under the heading Minor Resistance, and then crossed it out and written Retained Comfort Object, which was more accurate and significantly softer. Soren was in the corner, fully visible. He slept visible now most nights. He had his cracker tucked under one foreleg. It was, at this point, just dust and crumbs and the memory of a cracker, but he had it, and that seemed to be what mattered. Tully was on her back with all four legs in the air, which was her usual configuration. She was making a sound in her sleep, not her scream, not her growl, something lower, quieter, almost rhythmic, a sound Sova had not heard since they were newly hatched and small enough to hold. A purring sound, a settled sound. The sound of a creature that had figured out the world a little more than it had the day before. Sova sat with them in the dark and did not hurry. There were always things to attend to: dispatches, council matters, the 10,000 small urgencies of running an empire from a station in the middle of space. They would wait. She had learned this week to let some things wait. Her comm chimed, a message from Brax. She read it. Ambassador Dale confirms Norah will return at the same time tomorrow. She has asked whether she may bring a friend. Sova thought of her hatchlings, Raka and his practiced heaviness, Sorin and his cracker, Tully, who had talked to a puppet for 11 minutes and found it a perfectly reasonable use of time. She typed her reply. Tell her yes and ask what she needs. She turned the comm face down and sat back. Outside the station's wide windows the dark was total, the old dark, the space between stars dark that had no bottom to it, the kind of dark that made even empires feel small. But the hatchling wing was warm and lit and full of the small sounds of sleeping dragons who had, for the first time in a long time, nothing to be restless about. In every corner of the galactic conclave, species told stories about creatures that could not be tamed, that were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much. Humanity told different stories. Humanity's stories ended with the dangerous thing curled up next to you, asleep, one claw around a piece of string, and you sitting in the quiet beside it, realizing that the thing you were both afraid of this whole time was never really each other. It was just the not knowing. And not knowing, it turned out, was the easiest thing in the world to fix. You just had to walk through the door.